Hello. Just finishing a painting. We're getting pretty far along on this painting project, so before we go any farther, let's take a second to make sure we understand our goals, and then also I'll give you some pro tips to make sure that your painting turns out great. The first goal you have for this project is to paint highlights and shadows. For example, in the background of the room, we have a highlight side, a shadow side, and a medium value side. This gives this room a look of 3D and also the look like the light is coming from the top right and shining more brightly on the left wall than the right wall. The second goal you have for this project is to blend your shadows and highlights. For example, on that forearm, you'll have a shadow that fades into the middle and a highlight that fades as well. Getting your paint to fade like this creates a natural look, and it also gives the look of a curved cylinder for the forearm. The third goal in this project is not just to blend and fade your shadows, but to make sure that they blend and fade in the correct position and shape. For example, on the sphere, the shadow is in a C shape, and it fades into a circle, and the highlight's a circle that fades out. So the ability to not just paint your highlights and shadows, but paint them in the right position and the right shape, that's what's going to give your subjects a great look. Hopefully by now you understand the basic steps and subjects in this project. So I'm going to go through and give you some pro tips, some more detailed tips to help you be successful. For this demo video, I'm using a smaller sheet of paper. That was just so that I could finish it quickly. Keep in mind, you'll be working on a larger paper, which will actually make things easier because you'll have more space to blend your highlights and shadows. First pro tip, when you sketch out the lines of your room or the lines of your cube, use a thin brush and just a little bit of paint to make very light, thin lines. That way you don't have big, bulky, thick outlines to deal with and blend in. Second pro tip, use a rag to wipe away your background layer to make sure that it's as thin as possible. This will make it dry quickly and will also give it a nice, thin background look. And it will make it easier to paint your next layers over top of it. Third tip, when you sketch out the lines of your cube, make them parallel to the bottom corners of your wall. For example, the back of the cube is parallel to the right wall. The sides of the cube will be parallel to the left wall. And if you get that parallelogram shape for the top of your cube that is parallel to your walls, then you can just bring down 3 vertical lines. Draw the bottom, making sure again that bottom edges of the cube are parallel with the lines of the wall, not straight horizontal flat. And there you have a cube shape. Fourth tip, when you fill in a shape, you can fill in the middle part of it using a medium brush. But you want the edges to be neat. So when you get close to the edges, switch to a smaller brush. The smaller brush will allow you to make the edges neat and crisp, and your cube won't get all lumpy and funky and blended and kind of faded into your background. It will be a nice, sharp shape. Tip 5, when you paint your sphere, use a big brush, press it down, and then twist it. This will create a perfect circle. Now this perfect circle may be too small for the size circle that you want, but it will at least give you a perfect circle to start with, and then you can then grow outwards from that, and that will help keep your circle neat. So that press and twist method with a big brush is a great way to start your sphere. Since I'm working on a smaller paper, that sphere is big enough for me. I don't have to grow it at all, but keep in mind, you'll probably want to grow your sphere and have it get a little bit bigger than that. Tip 6, paint the location and shape of your shadows first. For example, for the sphere, I'm going to paint a nice C-shaped shadow right on the bottom left side since my light is coming from the top right. Then I'm going to blend it in, fading it up and fading it down, which leads me right into tip 7. Don't be afraid to dip in and get more black paint if you need to. You may need to add a little bit more darkness as you create shadows. You also may need to dip back into your base color. Always have a good glob of your base color mixed up on your plate to help blend your dark shadows in. Because if a shadow is taking over, you can dip back into that base color and push it into the shadow to mellow that shadow out. Tip 8, never let your highlights and shadows mix. For example, as I mix in this highlight, I'm going to make sure that it is completely faded in before it hits any part of the sphere that has black paint in it. Your highlight should fade into the base color before it meets the shadow. If your highlight meets the shadow, you're going to start to get a gray color, and it's going to completely erase your base color, and everything can kind of just turn into a big gray mess. You want to have your dark shadow fade into your base color, and your light highlight fading into your base color, so that there's a nice separation between the highlight and shadows of your subject. Tip 9. Be thoughtful as you sketch out the position of your hand. Remember, they could be coming from the top left, they could be coming from the right, they could be coming from the bottom. Once you decided on the position, make sure that you take your time as you sketch it out. It's okay to erase it, it's okay to fix it. Don't start painting your hand until you're happy with the shape of your arm and hand. Tip 10. As you draw your hand, make sure that your fingers extend past the thumb. There should be a little C shape in between them, and then the fingers will go just a little bit past the thumb, come up at it with a gentle hill, maybe even a little bit of a mountain peak where the knuckles are, and then slant a little bit down before they connect to the wrist. There should be a little bit of a thinner shape at the wrist, and then your forearm can get slightly thicker as it goes back off the page. As I mentioned earlier, when you fill in your shape, use a thin brush and be very neat along the edges of your hand so that your hand shape has a really neat, clean look. You don't want the edges to be fuzzy and sloppy. Tip 11. Draw out all of the shadows before you blend them in. This helps you keep track of where everything's going to go. For example, I'm going to put the shadow at the bottom of the arm, at the bottom of the thumb, at the bottom of the fingers, and in between each finger. Once you've identified the location of all your shadows, then all you have to do is blend them. If the base layer of your subject is still wet, the shadows will blend very easily. If the base layer is not wet, you'll need to use just a little bit of water on your brush or mix up more base layer and kind of add some wet base layer color back in there to help those shadows blend. A shadow on top of dry paint is not going to blend easily. Then repeat that same process, except this time with your highlights. Put a line on the location where the light would hit on the top of the forearm, the top of the thumb, the top of the hand, the tops of each finger, the knuckles. This kind of looks like a skeleton because if you think about it, wherever your hand pokes up, that's probably because there's a bone there that's kind of poking. So, makes sense. Then blend them in. Again, making sure that either your base layer is wet, that you've added some fresh base layer paint down on top of there, or you're using a little bit of water on your brush to help it blend. Tip 12, and our final tip. Before you paint any fingernails, put your hand in the same position as the hand that you're painting and see what fingernails you can see and which ones you can't. For example, in my painting, you just see the thumbnail and a little bit of the nail on the index finger. So those are the only ones I'm going to paint. And also, I'm noticing the thumbnail is shifted a little bit towards the bottom left, and the index finger nail is more towards the top right on that finger. So I'm going to paint those fingernails on in a realistic position. Fingernails that are in the wrong position or too big or too bright are going to mess up the look of the hand. So easy does it on the fingernails, and make sure they're in the right position. And that's all the tips I have. Let's get down to business.